Shaker cards are a ton of fun, not only to make, but also to receive. But sometimes they can be a little hard to mail because of the bulk. So, in today's video, I'm going to create a shaker card with very minimal bulk. If you're interested in any of the products that I'm using today, I will have them linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. Now, the set that I'm going to be using today is the Always and Forever from Simon Says Stamp. This is a large stamp set, but then it actually has two different coordinating dies that you could purchase, or you can get it in one big bundle. Now, the die set that I'm going to be using today is going to be starting with the one that is going to create a window with this beautiful floral heart frame. I'm also going to use the other coordinating die that die cuts out the sentiments as well. So my plan is to die cut out the floral frame and the inside of it to create the window. I'm placing the image into my Misti tool, and once I picked it up the door, I did condition it with my hand just by rubbing my fingertips over it. But you can see I'm picking up the stamp set kind of in that corner because there were some air bubbles in there. And if we leave the air bubbles, we could risk inking that piece of the stamp up and then transferring that ink. And I didn't want to do that. So I just kind of release those air bubbles and then I am inking that up with some intense black ink. I am going to stamp it twice just to make sure I have some nice solid crisp lines. I am using Hammermill Cardstock to stamp my image. And then because I stamped it twice, I am going to hit this with my heat tool really quick just to dry that ink. And that way I'm not going to risk smearing anything once I start coloring. I'm going to be coloring in my images with my Olo markers, which is an alcohol marker. So I'm going to do the entire thing, the frame and also the florals. Now with the florals, I decided to go with kind of a red and pink mix. So I started out with R 0.6, R 0.4, and R 0.3. And I'm just pretty much adding lines. I'm not really flicking or doing anything special with it. I'm just adding a line of each of those colors to give that a little bit of dimension to the flowers. And since I kind of want to have a mix of color of flowers like the red versus the pink, I am kind of skipping a few of them. And those are the ones that I'll be coloring in the pinks. So I will move to the other side of the heart and color those flowers in. And then I'm going to move on to a pink. Now with the pink, I'm only using a two color combination. I am doing R 2.4 and R 2.2. So it's just a nice bright pink that I thought fit well in with this particular design. And then I'll move on to coloring the leaves. Now, the leaves are super tiny. I am using YG 2.3 and just coloring them in, no shading, because there's really not a ton of room to do shading. I'm doing YO 2.3 for the frame that goes all the way around the heart. And then for the bow, I am going to do kind of a teal color combination. I thought this color also went well with the reds and the pinks and just kind of gave it that nice Valentine or even anniversary feel. Once I have everything colored in, I am going to start by taking the outside die. So this is going to cut the actual heart out. I'm going to line that up with the image and hold that down with Post-it tape. And then I'm going to bring in the inside piece. I didn't want to line them both up at once because I think that would just be harder to try and line them both up at the same time. So I did them individually, held them all down with Post-it tape and die cut that out. And now I have this really beautiful, delicate frame with that window. Before I create the actual shaker portion, I want to have a stamped background. So I'm using the Tucked Hearts background stamp from Simon Says Stamp, placed it in my Misti tool once again. And this time, after I picked it up with the door, I'm placing my cardstock over the actual stamp portion and then closing my Misti backwards. Now, my Misti does also have a waffle flower grip mat in the inside. And I'm purposely using this because I want to stamp this background multiple times. And I was worried that my cardstock would stick to the stamp. So by using that sticky mat in my Misti, it's going to hold that in place for me. I did condition the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and then I'm inking up my image using an embossing ink. So embossing ink is a clear, sticky ink, and it can be really hard to see sometimes. So that's where I decided to stamp it, I think maybe two, possibly three times, just to make sure I had that entire background covered. I didn't want this background to take away from my shaker card, but I did want to have this subtle interest. So I am going to be embossing it with the Hero Arts Iridescent Bronze Embossing Powder. They have numerous iridescent embossing powders in their collection. This one, it's really unique. It kind of gives a very light champagne color once that embossing powder is melted. So it's really gorgeous. It's really hard to capture on camera. You have to see it in person really to appreciate the beauty of it, but it added just enough shine and texture to my background. Now I'm taking that inner die or that inside window die, and I'm lining that up onto that card front. I'm going to run that through the die cut machine, and that's going to create my window for my shaker card. So my frame that I die cut earlier is going to line up right over the top of that to create that window, which I think is so cute and pretty. Now, because it's a shaker, I do need to line the back of that with some acetate, and I'm taking some double-sided tape and just going around all the outer edges of that acetate. So my acetate is cut to just a little bit shorter than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I remove the backing of that double-sided tape, and then I'm placing this on the back side of my panel. And then I'm going to line the back of this or create my well for my shaker using some foam tape. So normally with shaker cards, we usually kind of double up our foam tape to really allow that movement of the shaker. But for kind of my low bulk shaker card, I'm only going to use one layer. And there's a little bit of a trick to this with your sequence. So first, I am lining up that foam tape all around the edge of the window. You want to make sure your foam tape connects to each other or lines up right up next to it so you don't risk any sequence spilling out. And now for the shaker mix, I'm using Candy Hearts and Starshine from Simon Says Stamp. The trick to this is to make sure none of that sequence is stacked up on top of each other. You want to make sure it is completely flat throughout that well. Then I can remove the backing of the foam tape. I did add a few additional pieces down at the bottom just so I didn't have any sagging areas, and then added another piece of white cardstock over the top of that. So now when I flip it over, I have a little bit of movement in there. For the most part, a lot of it kind of just has a little bit of a wiggle room. There's not a ton. And that's how I get away with doing kind of a low bulk shaker is just by doing that one layer of foam tape and then making sure all of my sequence is nice and flat. Now I'm adding my frame just using some liquid glue, and I need to now stamp a sentiment. So originally, I planned on using this always and forever. I love this beautiful scripty font, and I thought I would have this kind of either going down at the bottom or across my card front. So I have some black cardstock that I conditioned with my anti-static powder tool. I'm inking that up with the Lawn Fawn YETI ink, which is a white pigment ink. So any white pigment ink would work here. I am also going to stamp this about 2 or 3 times to get nice coverage. And this is just one of my favorite hacks when it comes to white heat embossing, especially on a colored cardstock. Now I'm going to sprinkle on some white embossing powder, tap off any of that excess, and then I'm going to make sure that my heat tool is nice and hot, and then I can come in and melt all of that embossing powder. I'll line up the coordinating die for each of those, hold them down with the Spellbinder's Best Ever craft tape, and then run them through my die cut machine. And one of my favorite things about this is it die cuts all of those little pieces inside of the letters, which I think makes this look even more elegant. So you could use these for maybe somebody got married, celebrating an anniversary, and also Valentine's Day, but it doesn't always have to be just Valentine's Day. I decided to go with just the word forever and keep it pretty simple. And then I can always write a message or stamp a message in the inside of the card. And I did die cut out about 2 or 3 of the words forever out of black cardstock and layer it together. So it did have a bit of dimension to it. And that is my easy shaker card with a very minimal bulk. I hope you give this a try. Just make sure to spread out your sequence. That's really the key to all of it. I hope you enjoyed today's video and inspiration. Here is another video that I think you might enjoy.